are listening to the podcast for learning the language of A Course in Miracles, so you can understand the meaning, embody the message, and live the teachings as a way of life. Welcome to episode 2 of this podcast. I'm your host, Reverend Jennifer McSween, creator of this podcast, and the Course in Miracles practice coach for taking those who are studying the Course from inspiration to application. On this week's episode, I'm going to talk about the metaphysical framework of A Course in Miracles. It's what makes A Course in Miracles a very effective means of experiencing more peace, healing, and happiness as a way of life. And it's the inspiration behind this podcast for understanding the languages of A Course in Miracles. Because throughout my almost 20 years as a student and teacher of A Course in Miracles, I have found that without a clear understanding of the metaphysical context within which the Course is written, and without respecting that context as you read and study the Course, you will not only find it difficult to understand what the Course is really saying, but even more difficult, if not impossible, to apply what it's teaching on a practical level. So in this episode, I'm going to share with you what the metaphysical framework of A Course in Miracles is really all about. I'm also going to talk about what it is that makes the Course's teachings an effective means of experiencing peace and healing, and what it means to respect the metaphysical framework of the Course as you read and study. So this way, you don't find yourself like I used to be in the early days of my time with the Course, reading a certain line or passage over and over again, only to find yourself thinking, I know what it says, but what does it mean? Or if you do have that experience, at least you will be able to know how to look at it from a perspective that will help you to understand what it means. So what is the metaphysical framework of A Course in Miracles all about? Well, the metaphysical framework refers to the underlying ideas that give rise to the Course's unique perspective and its equally unique teaching. A Course in Miracles combines psychology and Christian terminology to create a form of spiritual psychotherapy. But the basis or the foundation for the way the Course practices its spiritual psychotherapy is philosophy, specifically metaphysics, that the branch of philosophy that addresses the relationship between God, man, and the universe, and the questions as to who we are, why we're here, and it examines the nature of reality or existence, independent of what we see, know, or experience through any of the 5 or even 6 senses, for that matter. Now, ordinarily, metaphysics is associated only with psychic or 6th sensory phenomena, and it is seen as something separate from and the opposite of what we see in the physical world. But the fact is, metaphysics is not something separate from the physical world. Rather, metaphysics is that invisible, non-physical aspect of what we see and experience in different forms in the physical world. Essentially, metaphysics or metaphysical can be seen as the same as spiritual, that non-physical aspect. Literally defined, metaphysics is a combination of 2 words. The Greek word meta, meaning beyond, and physics, which is the study of the interaction between energy and matter, what you can observe, measure, quantify, or categorize. So when you put them together, the definition of metaphysics is beyond what you can observe, measure, quantify, categorize, or know through any of the senses. It's really about the formless nature or aspect of existence, or of everything that exists, what we would refer to as consciousness. So this metaphysical or non-physical framework, that's the context within which A Course in Miracles is written. And this means that the Course shares the metaphysical perspective that consciousness is all there is, and that everything we see and experience is a playing out of the ideas in consciousness. The only difference is that A Course in Miracles uses the word mind instead of consciousness. But it shares the same perspective, that it has the same properties. Mind, consciousness is one and the same. It is a unified state of awareness, and everything is taking place in consciousness or in the mind, as the Course defines it. And the Course uses a very relatable analogy to define or to describe our experience in the world, or of being in the world. And the analogy that it uses is the analogy of dreaming. In our dreams, or when we are dreaming, all that is really taking place is that the ideas from our subconscious mind, they come up to the surface of our conscious mind, and we experience them in symbolic forms. And the reason why this happens is simply because when we're asleep, we're totally relaxed, and all our guards are down, our mental guards are down. So because we're not aware that we're dreaming, though, we experience everything that takes place in the dream as if it were real, as if it was really taking place. We react physically, emotionally, even physiologically to the things and the images that occur in our dreams. For example, if you dream that you're being chased, the adrenaline kicks in, you'll probably break out into a sweat, your heart rate is going to increase, and you will be very agitated. If you're dreaming, for example, that you're being attacked, you might lash out physically in some way to either defend or protect yourself. However, when we awaken, you realize you've never left the confines of your bed, and none of what you dreamt really happened at all. Well, looking at what we experience in the world and in our daily lives from this metaphysical perspective, as if it's nothing other than a dream, is what makes the Course's teachings a very effective means at helping us remain peaceful as we go about our daily lives. Because entertaining this perspective, this will allow us to look at everything that we do, have, or experience as nothing but our experiencing the ideas in consciousness in different forms, just like we do when we dream. And what is really taking place, or what is real, is that we are forever safe within the confines of our mind. So, the way we respect this metaphysical framework of the Course, as we read and study the Course. When we read, we need to be mindful that the Course is referring only to the idea of something, the idea that something represents. Because remember, if everything takes place in consciousness or in the mind, the content of the mind is ideas. There are no forms or specific shapes, no individual objects. It's simply one unified state of awareness. So when the Course talks about anything, it's only referring to the idea that this thing represents. And for example, if I were to ask, what's on your mind? And even if you were to physically close your eyes and tune in to what's on your mind, you would see images of either people and objects or sceneries and things like that. In reality, and in fact, these are not individualized separate objects or forms in your mind. They are images of these ideas, or images of these forms and objects. They are ideas. So that's the same state, that's the nature of consciousness or the mind. It's simply a state of awareness in which only ideas exist. And the Course's perspective is that only mind exists, or consciousness exists, and the content of the mind is ideas. And so that is all it is always referring to. So what we read in the Course then, or when we read the Course, it's to be taken metaphorically, not literally. In other words, we need to go beyond the ordinary surface level definition of a word and entertain the idea that it represents. So let me give you an example of what this would mean in terms of reading the Course. When A Course in Miracles talks about you in the Course, it is not referring to the human being, the body, or any form by which you identify yourself. It's referring to the you that is an idea in the mind. So it is this perspective of you that you need to envision in order to understand when the Course gives a line that says, you're one with God. I mean, it would be impossible for you to understand what it means to be one with God if you see yourself as a separate, individual, flawed body that is a human being. So we need to read the Course from the metaphorical perspective in order to understand what it's really saying, and so then we can put it into practice. Because continuing to entertain the idea of yourself as a body, or identify with yourself as a body and try to see yourself as this body that is one with God, that's impossible. So the metaphysical framework of the Course can be said to be the mechanism, so to speak, that gives the Course, this, or makes the Course a very effective means for a happy, peaceful, loving experience as we go about our lives in the world. And this is what the metaphysical framework of the Course is all about. So that's it for today. I hope that helped to clear things up a bit and what the metaphysical perspective is all about and why it matters and how we are to respect it in order to be able to better understand the language that is being used in the Course. So thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of the podcast for Understanding the Language of A Course in Miracles. And if you enjoyed this episode, please leave me a review and subscribe so you don't miss another episode. And please invite your friends to listen. Have a great week and see you on the podcast next Wednesday.